I think it was Linnea Palmisano's newsletter, and at the bottom she talks about the clearance, and she cites, for example, that Public Works doesn't have the capacity, and that the equipment wouldn't necessarily help clear the entire width of the sidewalk. And I think that, when we get to that juncture, if we're being intentionally obtuse or hide,
Well, if we buy garbage trucks that are too small, it won't fit all the trash, right?
yeah,
And so
exactly.
maybe we shouldn't do trash collection.
Exactly, and I feel like as a public servant, if you're hiding behind mediocrity as a reason not to do anything, that's kind of what I was saying earlier. It's like skepticism and cynicism that leads to no action.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
Calling out tap people. This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now. 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 Right now.
Because I have a gaping face wound.
That's all right.
Don't watch on YouTube, everyone. My face is bleeding all over the place. Welcome to the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards, the one with the bloody face, and my guest is José Antonio Zayas Cabán. Have I mastered that?
Yep, it's great.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
From our Streets Minneapolis, we're here to talk about sidewalks and
Shaving.
dabbing the blood and shaving mishaps. We're also here to talk about that. I'm going to stop shaving before episodes. Sidewalk, snow, and ice. It's a big problem. It is the thing about Minneapolis that I got very exercised about when I first moved here, and I think over time I have gotten immune to the appropriate level of outrage that I should have about it. It makes things dangerous and impassable. It's a transportation problem. People have places to be, and if you're on your way to the bus, it makes it unsafe or impossible to get to your bus. Jose, is that an accurate description of the problem we have here in Minneapolis?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like a lot of policies and budgeting decisions. I think sometimes that we forget to talk about and humanize the lived experience. What is it like for you to try to get to work? What is it like for you to go out and go shopping or visit family members or engage socially or use amenities? Whatever is it that you want to do? A city where winter type weather can go on for basically half of the year, 6 months, sort of October through sometimes even into the spring months. It just makes a lot of sense for us to think about how do we want people to experience the city, when they're going about it. And sidewalks is such a seminal part of how we get around, whether you're elderly, disabled, transit dependent, you're on a bike, or, even from the point of view, like the intersecting spectrum of like, if you choose to do those things because you're a climate conscious person, or if you choose to do those things because we want to be healthier, there's all these positive reasons to get around and use our sidewalks. So it just makes a lot of sense for us to really tackle this in a comprehensive way once and for all, I think.
And also, these are things we have decided as a city that we want to be encouraging people to do. Like it's policy of the city. We want fewer car trips. We have a 2040 plan and a transportation action plan that is all about dense pedestrianized cities. And if the pedestrian part of that doesn't work, whether it's somebody walking to the bus or somebody walking for transportation, or, everyone is a pedestrian sometimes. And if the pedestrian part of your equation just doesn't work for huge chunks of the year, good luck with your vision of a dense pedestrianized city.
Yeah.
So the city has a role in making sure this works. Let's talk about what the current solution is. It's mostly all just reliant on property owner, homeowner compliance. Do it yourself. Take care of your property. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and actually, in our advocacy, we talk about that a little bit, because in the report that came out, I think it was in 2018, for example, they talk about this compliance approach method, and we cite it, but I think it's 30,000 complaints in the last 5 or 6 years that have come through, and you know. I think the other point is really critically important, that it's a foundational pillar to the transportation action plan. So, when we move in the direction of implementing a broad scope policy goal to increase density and pedestrian activity, multimodal mobility, and just make life easier for folks, a compliance method like that um, isn't going to get there. It's punitive in nature. And it also, even from the point of view right now of like a property owner or a landlord, like again, if you're elderly or disabled and you have every good intention of maintaining a good home or a good property, you really can't get out and necessarily comfortably do that. Um, and, we feel like we cite examples of other cities where this happens, and the one that um, I think I shared some information with you. We've highlighted most prominently in terms of the size of the market is Montreal. Like, it's totally doable to go the other way and just have the municipality clear those sidewalks and do it themselves and do it quite thoroughly and effectively. And like you're saying, make way for these larger policy goals that the city has for itself, these larger climate goals. Um, but again, I'll say it again, through the lens of the individual experience. Like I always think about policies and policymaking when we get into these discussions, like, let's not forget that when you're doing work like that as a decision maker, it is about kind of first filtering it through what kind of a moral contract you want to make with your community and your society. And as a community member, it's like, what kind of experience do you want your neighbors, your fellow community members to have out there? And I think compliance with punitive enforcement that then, to your point, if it's not done well, if there's a portion of the sidewalk that isn't cleared, now the whole block is compromised, and then that creates issues for an entire block of people. And then the other thing, when you go in that direction, as you can see, even in how people respond to the advocacy, people become a little bit cynical and skeptical, and because it's kind of like you're making the community members sort of fight over crumbs, rather than just like adopt this universal approach that serves everyone similarly across the board. Of course, if you implement it well, um, then it would just be more effective at eliminating that, skepticism and that sort of like animosity between community members.
How does Montreal do it? As you mentioned Montreal, do they do the entire city? Do they only do portions of the city?
I believe they do the entire city, and they kind of have like a protocol. We just kind of found it and we've been sharing it with the public, but like they have an ordered protocol where like depending on the level of snow, um, they start. It says I think it starts like they start as soon as the roads and sidewalks become slippery, and then after you reach, I think it's like 2.5 centimeters of snow, they start plowing, and then they start loading it, sort of like removing it from the areas rather than letting it pile up after I think it's like 10 to 15 centimeters. And it's a very simple, I shared you in the link and you're welcome to share with folks, but it's a very simple explanation, but it kind of basically just says like, we're going to be doing this continuously when these sort of three types of situations take place, and then they have sort of like level of priority and a way for folks to check in depending on in the execution of the program. So like again, the way I read it, I mean, at first glance, it's just like a way for folks to check in and report something if it's not where it needs to be or what's going on. But we like that example too, just because market size is pretty similar in terms of per capita, the population. They have 11,000 people per mile in Montreal, about 8,000 people per mile in Minneapolis.
So the population densities are similar.
Yeah,
That's what you're saying.
exactly. And they also have much more snowfall than we do, and they do it effectively. And it's something I can say firsthand just because I just recently traveled there at the end of September, and of course, I was aware of the fact that we were kind of getting ready to roll out our next effort. And while I was traveling there with my wife, I asked folks, like, how do you feel about this? The folks who go to college there, and like, how are you enjoying this? And, it was pretty consistent. It's like, it's great to have a service where like we have options as to how we move around. And they made the same connections that you're making, which is like, people who choose to move in other ways, other than driving, they feel like that choice is sort of provided for them when they step out and the sidewalks are being cleared.
The number 20 million I've seen thrown around a bunch is like that's what it would cost to do a citywide and do it like a more extensive program compared to on the low end 5 million, which I assume is how to do it poorly. Is the 5 million number?
Right.
What is that number based on? The city, a city analysis? Have they like incorporated how other places do it?
I think they went into other places, but they basically estimated the cost of doing it for the entire jurisdictional network, which I think is like almost 2,000 miles. And it comes from a report that they published about 5 years ago, sort of citing the initial cost of the equipment, and then that more or less it would cost $20 million to remove snow, on like at every sort of event. And they also made some estimates, based on like property tax. We pitch it in a different way just to kind of help people understand, even though that's not necessarily the way it's going to happen. We say, on average it'd be about $50, $47 a person. But even if you look at it that way, I guess for myself, living here in North Minneapolis, like the treatment that we have to purchase and the time that we spend shoveling, to me,
Right.
it's quite a bit more than $50, a year.
So, like if it's done the way they do like assessments for street repairs, I would assume it would be like if you own a large property with a lot of street frontage, you pay more.
Exactly.
And if you like are a condo owner, one person among many in a building, you pay much less because your portion of the street frontage is less. That's one way they could do it, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that in general, if you start dealing with it as an utility, I think there's a good chance that cost over time will be less than doing the removal yourself, and I think what this kind of boils down to here in Minneapolis, to be honest, from my perspective, it's about political will,
Right.
and for council members and the mayor to get together and find the political will to do something that, in the United States, at least the way we're advocating for it, would set kind of a gold standard for snow removal. But at the same time, in a city like Minneapolis, just seems like a intuitively obvious thing to do. And you look at, for example, we just posted, I think it was Linnea Palmisano's newsletter. And at the bottom, she talks about the clearance, and she cites, for example, that Public Works doesn't have the capacity, and that the equipment wouldn't necessarily help clear the entire width of the sidewalk. And I think that, when we get to that juncture, if we're being intentionally obtuse or
Well, if we buy garbage trucks that are too small, it won't fit all the trash, right?
yeah,
And
exactly.
so maybe we shouldn't do trash collection.
Exactly, and I feel like as a public servant, if you're hiding behind mediocrity as a reason not to do anything, that's kind of what I was saying earlier. It's like skepticism and cynicism that leads to no action in situations where you're a public servant or a public official is kind of, it doesn't do. I think the mentality that we should approach this with is if something is not well, even folks who drive cars who sometimes will make the argument that they don't even do a good job on roads. It's like that's not a reason to do nothing. That's a reason to do more and to do better. And, instead of engaging in skepticism and cynicism, we should sort of engage, funnel that same energy. Like, I respect the fact that some things are not done well, but funnel that energy in the direction of take a couple of steps, like call these people or send a few emails, because again, then we're dealing with, what I keep saying is like humanizing your community members' lived experience. Like, what society do you kind of want to live in a community where we have a lot of precipitation, for people to be able to comfortably access their form of transportation. And, you can get into any kind of numbers, like, about one third of our population cannot afford to own a car. So they need sidewalks to get around, period. And about one tenth of our population reports a disability. It's important for us to go beyond just being cynical and proposing inaction or hiding behind mediocrity or pushing back on things without proposing any solution whatsoever, and really look at, let's rehumanize the situation. And I think I was telling you about my mother-in-law, for example, with a car crash. Like, what's the cost of then maybe running into a situation where something happens? There's medical costs. There's dealing with
Right.
insurance. There's emotional and mental health issues that can arise, and what?
And that's all in the news. I've seen news stories like slip and fall injuries are a problem. They do news stories. They interview medical professionals talking about how serious a problem this is.
Hospitals are seeing an increase in slips and falls as people navigate through the snow and ice.
We all know the feeling
That feels a little gnarly.
of slipping or falling on the ice. One fall can change everything in seconds.
This is a life-changing event for me.
A fall left Golden Valley pastor David Kent with a broken neck and partial paralysis.
We're seeing a lot of head injuries from slip and falls, some neck injuries where people have broken their neck, injured their spine.
The city council, to talk about like skeptics who offer no solutions, there was a pilot, a proposal to fund a little pilot. $200,000, I think, was the amount, and it didn't pass. We've been talking about this issue for years. I am a little skeptical. I want this to work well, and that's the approach I come at it with. But to not even do a pilot and start small, see what you can do, what works, and then build on that, it means this is not a priority for you. You are happy with the status quo. You want to do nothing. That's how I think it should go. I think we should tell me where I'm wrong or if I'm wrong, because I think our Streets is advocating to just ramp up to the whole thing immediately. Is that the approach?
Yeah, and we advocated for a pilot, and it went as far as I say. On December 6th there was a vote. It didn't go through, and we just sort of decided internally, it's time for us to advocate for the whole thing and start to kind of model how that could work. Although there's nothing inherently wrong with piloting it and developing it and refining it. So, for example, if you pilot it, one of the things that we had advocated for last year was for the pedestrian priority network to be sort of the sample for the pilot. There's a lot of commerce and there's a lot of importance for people to be able to navigate that corridor. But as you look at it more holistically, I live in North Minneapolis, and it's no secret that's a community that gets very little investment across the board. And when I go out to the corner where the bus stop is on Lindell and 26th, I see people rolling up on a wheelchair on 26th. And I remember noticing a mother and daughter on their bikes. Their only choice was to be on the road. Everything else was completely inaccessible. And when I say this, and I don't know how folks, if they know that part of North Minneapolis really well, two people walking on the roads with their bikes right next to a greenway. That's where the Great Northern Greenway is. They couldn't use a dedicated two-way bike lane that's built onto the sidewalk. They had to get on the street. And so what we're saying is like, let's shoot for what's obviously plausible and been studied, and let's work through kinks while making sure that we're investing into the whole city so that no person gets to have this experience as soon as possible. But
Yeah.
yeah, so we're ramping it up, and we feel very strongly that it's time for Minneapolis to sort of see itself as a city that is in the north of the United States, almost to Canada, and that this is something that should have happened a long time ago.
You see people in wheelchairs and mobility devices using the street, using the bike lane because the sidewalks just don't work.
Yeah, and that's it, and that's why, because we could talk about personal experience, and that's the thing. Like, I'm a daily runner. I run on the bike lanes right now. My sidewalks are not usable in Hawthorne. But that's where, like, that's a question that, to kind of love on my team just a second. Like, what's the fundamental question here that we're asking of people when it comes to these kinds of policies that are sort of, that could be universally implemented? It's like, are you willing to walk out there into the world and care for or love someone that you don't know at all? Not like a family member or a friend, but look at people with a certain degree of empathy that translates into the kind of expectations that you set forward for your public officials in order for you community members to benefit from policies that directly impact folks who are having different experiences. Like, I can get around no matter what, basically. But I would say, like, if you ask that question of all of my teammates, the answer would be a resounding yes. Like, we want to go out there as an advocacy team and as a program and let people know that we genuinely care about what happens to them, not because they're friend or family, but because they're part of a community that we want to see thrive in a certain way. And then that kind of informs the way that we do our work. But I think it's critically important that we try to find some sense of empathy when you go out there and you see people experiencing it just the way that you are. And like I said, feeling skeptical and cynical, I do think it's important. What we're saying is, like, funnel it into something positive, put that energy towards the people who do actually have the power to make a difference right here, right now, and let them know that you're feeling cynical or skeptical about something that you feel like is really important, rather than necessarily kind of move you in the direction of not taking any action. Because, of course, like Councilmember Palmisano, then they'll sit back and lean on that and send out a newsletter and let people know that because we don't have the capacity right now, we're just not going to do anything.
Here's some more skepticism I'll throw your way. What if the city is just bad at it? Because the park near where I live, Mueller Park, park board is allegedly responsible for clearing that sidewalk. It doesn't do a great job of it. And so, like, what if it turns out badly? That's why I'm kind of a fan of, like, starting small, getting it right, and building up. What if it doesn't work? That's a dumb question, but, like, what if we do bad at it?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the folks who come out and say, well, the roads, they'll get cleared very well. Why should we do this anyway? I'm comfortable with saying half of that, I'm okay with half of that. I disagree with the other half. And to me, because if you're asking me individually, obviously, like, as an individual, I feel like it's about making sure that I communicate to my representatives that I want something to be implemented in a way that's effective, But as an organization at our Streets Minneapolis, that's why we go through the trouble of modeling a plausible outcome and sourcing the highest standards. I'm a musician, you know this, and the phrase that I sometimes use is perfect practice makes perfect. That you can do things well at the outset and then continue to sort of like scale up those careful approaches. And in this case, we wouldn't be the first city in the history of the world to do snow removal. We can go through a process where we can source successful examples and compile them and do a thorough analysis and make a determination of what's the kind of an investment that it would take for these snow events to get addressed in such a way that it's done well right from the outset. And, I interviewed with, I think his name is Dave Orrick. I shouldn't try to say names on recorded podcasts because if I get them wrong, but it was from the Star Tribune.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
And he was like, well, what's your position on, if you use a plow there, it's going to leave a layer. And what's your position with following up on that with some manual labor? And I said, yeah, well, absolutely. We want the city of Minneapolis to set the gold standard. I don't think snow removal is some kind of secret that people can't solve.
Well, they do it downtown. The downtown improvement district does it downtown. What do they do? We kind of have pilots in Minneapolis with these special service districts. Figure out what they do, build on that, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And what I told him too, I was like, I think to combine that with, I think we were interviewed, I think it was Carly with, I don't remember which station it was, but at the end of the clip, they interview a person who's like, well, what about these mom and pop snow removal?
Yeah, I saw that too. Like
Lou Anderson had a small engine shop and says she got to know hardworking folks who this could put out of business.
I'm not on board. I mean, in theory, it's great, but if you look at the people you're going to, like I said, you're going to take their only source of income away.
Like we're going to put people out of work if the city funds tens of millions of dollars a year in snow removal. I think we're putting people to work in that situation.
And I think that's right.
We're putting homeowners out of work because they will no longer be required to shovel their sidewalks. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, when you talk about making an investment, then that's when you get into, I think, again, back into the way we do advocacy intentionally is that when you talk about transportation and infrastructure, that can always be thought of as an opportunity to develop some kind of local economy. For example, this kind of work obviously would be seasonal work. So this could be an opportunity to create employment opportunities and source that employment and train people that live in the communities that they would be clearing. So there's some sense of ownership, and belonging to that neighborhood. And the same thing with that sort of potential follow-up manual labor to make sure that everything is scraped really neatly. And even maybe repurpose the compliance system that they have and improve it so that instead of people calling in to report a landlord, they can call in and say, obviously with changing weather, even if you clear a sidewalk, things might melt and there'll be some refreezing, create some kind of an entry point for folks to call in and say like, hey, thank you for clearing this and now this has happened, and for the city to have a mechanism to come out and follow up on the work. But I see it, and we're sort of looking at it as an opportunity to reinvest, those allocated resources into the community. And seasonal work for folks who need a little bit of training is not a bad thing, especially when you hire them from the community. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like if you're hiring a young person to do follow-up manual labor on a sidewalk at a proper wage, I think it's kind of a neat thing for them to be getting paid to support their own neighborhood. It kind of goes back to what I'm saying. It's like community, lived experience. You kind of humanize the whole process, and you're still serving the city universally, across those 24 miles.
I want the audience to know right now that I think I have stopped bleeding. My face has stopped bleeding. Here's a curveball, Jose. I saw on the local news that, Kirk Cousins. Are you a football fan at all? Do you pay attention to like Vikings news? I don't really, but I saw. Are you familiar?
Our community engagement specialist, Raquel, loves the Minnesota Vikings, and I support her in her love of the Vikings, and I knew who he is and some of the players there.
I think he makes like 30 million or more in a year. I looked up his salary because I saw on the news his neighbor shovels his driveway for him.
Vikings quarterback Kirk Cousins is singing the praises of his neighbor. He's done it more than once.
Yeah, so that got us thinking, who is this guy? Who is this neighbor?
My neighbor actually does shovel my walk, so I have one of the best neighbors in the world. When they talk about Minnesota nice, I live that on a daily basis with my neighbors.
And it occurs to me, like, do you not know that Kirk Cousins is a multimillionaire many times over and can probably pay someone to shovel his driveway? It blew my mind that his neighbor felt compelled to shovel his driveway for him. It was weird. And then Kirk Cousins is like, wow, you really saved me a lot of time. I couldn't do that. I couldn't spend my whole day shoveling my driveway. You could hire someone to do this, Kirk Cousins. Do you have a response to that? What's our street's position on Kirk Cousins' neighbor shoveling his driveway for him?
I think Kirk Cousins could probably figure out a way to do an estimate on the amount of time that this person has spent clearing the sidewalks and probably make a very nice gift or some kind of recognition for a neighbor who is saving him a lot of time while he's trying to get the Minnesota Vikings through the wild card round of the playoffs next week. And
are they in the playoffs? I didn't even know that. You really do pay attention to the Vikings.
Well, I mean, Raquel pays attention, and I support her, and so I'm paying a little bit more attention. But I think that is the way to go. And hey, my neighbor, I live in a duplex, and again, obviously that's silliness. I do think Kirk Cousins could definitely make a nice gift or help him out in some other way. But like, I have neighbors who recently had a kid. They have 3 kids, and the parent, one of the parents, just had a heart procedure. Worked out a little deal with the landlord, and I'm helping clear their area. And like sometimes when I'm out of town, like for example, I'm traveling now to support a family in Missouri. They hold our boxes, and when the mail comes in and stuff like that, and it's like it becomes kind of a mutual aid, and like that to me reinforces the same point. Like publicly elected officials, public servants are there to serve the public. Why not take that energy and codify it into policy that makes people feel in the same exact way? How nice would it be for you to have a city council member that says, I represent your ward, and as my neighbor, I'm going to go fight for you so that when you walk out there because you've had heart surgery or you've had a child or you're disabled or you have a daughter that you want to ride your bike with, as a neighbor, you deserve to have the opportunity to use those sidewalks, or those areas comfortably. As I think a great natural reciprocity for getting elected and giving them that trust, to do their jobs. It doesn't it feel kind of silly to be talking about snow removal in Minneapolis in a way?
Why? Why would it be silly to talk about this? I've been talking about it the whole time I've lived in Minneapolis. You know what I've been talking about? The terrible conditions of our sidewalks.
Whether we should be doing it or no.
Why would it be silly that we continue to talk about it?
Yeah, we should.
You mean it's silly that we even have to ask?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So
it's an election year, Jose. Who should people be hassling? I can think of. Let's see. Let's run through the wards. They should be hassling Ward 3. Michael Rainville, hassling Ward 4, Latricia Vitaw, hassling Ward 6, Jamal Osman. Am I right about that?
Mm-hmm.
Hassling whoever is going to be in Ward 7. Continue to hassle Lisa Goodman as she finishes out her glorious 26-year career in Ward 7. Hassle Andrea Jenkins in Ward 8. Hassle Ward 11, Emily Koski. Hassle Andrew Johnson. Where's Andrew Johnson stand on this?
I'll tell you everyone who voted in favor And Andrew did not. The folks who supported were Aisha Shuktai, Ellie Payne, Robin Wansley, Jeremiah Ellis, and Jason Chavez. So the ones you didn't mention.
The progressive five, yeah, are the ones you don't need to hassle over this.
No, and I mean...
And Ward 13, Linnea Palmisano, hassle her because she's skeptical. In bad faith, too.
I think the other thing that I would add there is like, what went through was a pilot, and we, as an organization, we've asked all council members to support a fully funded program, and that includes the ones who voted in favor. That's another good point. Like, reaching out to council members should always be part of the conversation, whether something good is going on or something not good is going on. Like, I would always encourage folks to make that part of their relationship, like not just necessarily pay attention during election season, but to kind of try to develop a relationship with their representatives around the issues that they care about, because that's what they listen to and that's what they respond to.
Yeah, especially in election year. Contact candidates. Ward 12 has an open seat, 4 candidates, I think. Candidates all over the city trying to earn your vote, and if they hear from enough people that this is a priority, it enters the conversation and maybe something happens.
Yes. And, we are always kind of surprised, like we make decisions about where we're going to do advocacy, and, we rely, for example, on Action Network for folks to send emails, and I think we're coming up on 25,000 emails for this campaign. It's circumstantial. Like, we do our best to roll something out, but people are very interested in the subject because they experience it so harshly. And this winter, I don't know, it felt like it snowed a lot, but also like quite continuously, for months. And at this point, you can tell that there's even while we were out door knocking, there's just a lot of awareness because people have been experiencing it so consistently over the course of the winter.
I've got a bone to pick with the 25th and Lyndale intersection right outside the Loon, formerly Loon Deli, now Loon Smoke Shop. It's a mess. They don't shovel at all. It's my fault for not reporting to 311, but it's terrible. There's like a concrete block randomly buried under a pile of snow that's blocking the intersection. A garbage can has somehow managed to be right in the curb cut as you come off Lyndale Avenue. It's a disaster. I don't know why I brought that up, but that's the spot where it's the route I take to go grocery shopping constantly, and it's just embarrassing.
What better way to support locally owned commerce in a city where it snows so much than to make sure that sidewalks are clear for people to have access to those businesses and support them.
All my customers drive, Jose. All my customers drive. You've heard that one before.
Yeah, and because we did so much work, and obviously so thankful for you and your partner for your involvement around Hennepin, just the tireless work there. We started talking more about this too, that sometimes we have been we have been conditioned against our own intuitions in a way to associate driving vehicles with the improvement of commerce and tax revenue, when in fact, when we were doing that work, we talked about it publicly that people who spend more are folks who spend less because they don't own cars or they're not spending on their cars. So people who use their bikes and people who use the bus tend to spend more money on local businesses, and they tend to spend a little bit more of that disposable income. And also, businesses greatly benefit from reliable multimodal transportation because a lot of times their staff, that's what they use to get there and get back.
Right.
And that's how they make their commute. So like, it is to the benefit in terms of employee retention and revenue and commerce to...
Yeah, I'm kind of a captive customer. Like, my bias by necessity is towards proximity. I have to patronize local businesses because I'm not like driving off to Costco to get my trunk full of bulk items. It's a pleasure to shop near to me because that's the way I can get there. I can get there quickly and ideally the sidewalk is cleared and safe so that I can get there and I don't have to purchase a car to avoid the danger and get my butt to Costco for a 5-gallon jug of mustard or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and there, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as citing any data, but we kind of experience it when you're talking about transit, rolling, walking, biking. You experience your surroundings a little bit more differently, and you tend to engage with the things in between a little bit more, in between your destinations, and so that's that's a sort of like an indirect way to encourage community. It's like now that you're walking somewhere, you're gonna notice those storefronts a little bit more, or people you might know. It's like
you end up going places by accident. You end up places you didn't intend to go because it was along the way, and it's easy to stop. You don't have to like slam on the brakes and slide on an icy road. You just stop and say, wow, I didn't know that was there. Or you see someone. If you're in a car and you see someone you're honking at each other as you blow past each other at 50 miles an hour, even if you can stop. But if you're walking or biking, I have so many like random chance interactions that I would not have if I was in a car. This is a great way to live, and more people should do it, and we should make it safe for people to do so, because city policy says we want people to be doing these things. Why are we working against our own policies, Jose?
Yeah, and again, when Jacob Fry is quoted saying, "This is not my top priority. This is not even my 10th priority,"
Wait, did he say that?
The article in the Tribune, and we quoted it and sent it out to folks.
I need to read more Star Tribune.
Yeah, well, at famous last words, but like the idea there, what we're trying to communicate to people is that when you say something like that about a policy or a budget line item, you're also saying something about the people who are impacted. We're talking about people with disabilities. We're talking about elderly people and transit-dependent folks. And so, when you dehumanize what you're saying, it misses the point, because this is a policy that directly affects lived experiences. And so the way we took it and, the way we communicated is that in saying that, he's sort of dismissing a large swath of the population that can't afford cars, that are transit dependent, that are elderly and disabled. And it's another way of saying, like, these people are not a priority,
Yeah.
And
also, like, what is your solution, Jacob Fry? Is this another one of those things where he's saying no and not like saying this is my solution, this is how I'm going to make it work better?
Right. There's no solution provided. We'd like for city council members not to just come out and explain why things can't happen, or why they're difficult. We'd like them to start working on, proposing solutions. No, I think, that was obviously a disappointing thing that he said, and we were glad that it was Dave Orrick who quoted him saying that, because that sends a message to the community members who depend on snow removal to be able to get around.
Jose, do you have any recommendations for our audience? Are you familiar with this segment that we do where people recommend things that are enriching their lives? A book, a movie, a piece of music, a place you like to go, something that other people will enjoy.
Well, I was asked a question about what I've been watching recently this morning, doing another presentation about Bring Back Sixt, and I responded by saying that I watched Finding Forrester. I don't know the name of the writer and director, but it's the same folks who did Good Will Hunting, and it's about a young writer who finds an unlikely mentor. I really like that. I have another life as a musician, and stories like that really interest me, because there's a lot of like self-discipline and doing work in the arts, and sometimes these kind of unlikely mentors that come through help kind of nudge you along and give you the confidence to like chase after a little bit more. Um, and as far as listening to music, honestly, I don't listen to a lot when I'm practicing because I have concerts coming up, and my mind gets a little bit saturated. But the things that I've been listening to, I should say, are the things that I am preparing to perform. Let me look it up and then, yeah, I'll say this in the awkward Google search moment. We got a nomination for the CD that came out last year, and um,
Are you saying you're an award-winning musician? Is that what you're saying?
Grammy
Award
nominated.
nominated?
Grammy
Are you
nominated.
Grammy nominated?
Yeah, we are. So I'll say this and then I'll find it if you don't mind. We um, Part of the reason why I got into advocacy work is because in music I was doing musical projects and recording projects that had to do with social issues, and so we commissioned composers and kind of propose certain subjects. And when hurricanes went through Puerto Rico and engaged Miguel Senon, and I got a grant to commission him, he wrote a work called The Invisible Nation, El País Invisible. And it's about Puerto Rico's political status with the U.S. and how it's been in this limbo for 5 centuries. It's a beautiful work. It's motivically rooted in Puerto Rico's national anthem. It's very modern sounding, but it was nominated for Best New Composition. And I feel really proud of it just because like we go through a lot of trouble to get these like liner notes, and we work with authors and writers, and there's all this research behind it. And so we've been performing it with him on and off this year. But we're gonna do another round of performances with him, and Puerto Rico culturally, the main influencers, even though there's a lot of European, it's Spain itself, and obviously West Africa. There were a lot of people who came over as slaves, and then the local indigenous culture. And one of the styles of music that emerged is called danza, and we call it danza puertorriqueña. And so I kind of got it in my head that I wanted to do a little duo that is based on a danza puertorriqueña. I'm gonna look up the document now because
Okay.
I'll get going and talking about this stuff and never ever stop. But
Can I play a piece of music that I composed myself?
Yeah.
Based on a karaoke version of "Candle in the Wind" and Lisa Goodman's audio.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think it's helpful for anyone on the committee to criticize others, and quite frankly, I think it's kind of hurtful. But to be honest, I'm not really interested in fighting old fights, and I know you're not either. I'm happy to provide the minority opinion.
I don't know if I want to listen to this whole thing. So let me know when you're ready. I just figure I went to the trouble of making this. I should just constantly play it for people, but it's 1 minute and 46 seconds.
Wow.
Are you familiar, Jose? Did you happen to see that on Twitter? The Lisa Goodman tribute that I did?
No, I'll look it up though.
Oh,
That's
you should go look. I'm not going to subject you to it here. There's a whole video component to it too. At the end, she ends up admitting to her role in an assassination attempt. If that's not giving it away.
Wow. Well, okay, I have a music recommendation.
Okay.
So, like I said, working on the next CD release and the next round of concerts in 2023 with Miguel Senon and also with my trio. And we're gonna do an arrangement of a song called Alondra de los Bosques, and it is a danza puertorriqueña. It is a short little thing that you can find on YouTube. And danza is, like the word says, it's kind of a dance. So it's sort of like a 3-6 feel, and kind of a compound rhythm. But it's a beautiful sort of traditional work, very representative of Puerto Rican folklore. So that's my recommendation on the music. And as far as what was it? Movie, music, and what else?
Well, you didn't have to hit all the categories if you didn't have them, but if you have them, it was just like opening it up so you could mention anything. What are you enjoying?
Yeah, and so along with that work, the project that we're into, which is the recording of El País Invisible, we worked with a couple of authors who contributed essays that are going to be in the liner notes. And one of them is Daniel Immerwahr, and he wrote a book called How to Hide an Empire. And it is a very easy read, but about sort of the United States relationship with the world. And obviously there's some mention of Puerto Rico, which is why I've been reading it. And the other one is called Empire of Borders by Todd Miller. I think it's part of a 3-part series. And Todd Miller's a reporter that spends a lot of time going to different borders around the world and kind of experiencing what things are like in these areas, and obviously a particular focus on how the U.S. funds borders and border technologies. But he also wrote about Puerto Rico and very kindly also contributed a short essay that then kind of helped us write the liner notes that are coming out in the spring album. And I would say, it's interesting how you talk about the way you've been experiencing Minneapolis, because as a musician, this upcoming release is very much about my own experience as someone who grew in a colony and now lives in the mainland. But the cover is a set of streets that were near my grandma's home and her neighborhood, and the neighborhood was named after the Americas, so all the streets were named after capitals. And the only reason I knew that as a kid is because I was always tasked with like walking to get the groceries or do some chores and errands for her. And so that was very much my experience as a kid, was just walking around the city and noticing, it was like Kingston or the Janeiro or whatever, Buenos Aires. And now that's kind of full circle played a role in this whole album project that where we selected composers from these different Latin American composers, and it's a little bit of like a tour of the Americas in a way, through kind of my experience as a little kid walking around getting ham, or bringing flowers or buying the cake or whatever it was. It was all walking, and it was just a great memory that I had as a kid, and I was like, what a cool opportunity to kind of put it together into this project,
Thank you to my guest, José Antonio Zayas Cabán, from our Streets Minneapolis, and go hassle your council members. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.